Hello and welcome to the second lecture presentation for COM375 Audience Response to Media. Today we'll be covering the readings for this week, which cover Chapter 9 of the textbook, which is Sports Media on Screen, and then also an article by Sherry and Boyan from 2008, which was on D2L, covering uses and gratifications. Again, if you only have read one of these things at time of watching, feel free to skip ahead until the point of the video when we start covering uses and gratifications, or stop before that point. But we'll begin with sports on screen. This was Chapter 9. It deals entirely with sports entertainment, gives both a historical perspective and then really frames it primarily in terms of disposition theory, but gives some other explanations for why sports are so appealing and why we watch them on screen. Originally, sports as entertainment came from ancient Greece when people were watching actually what would become the Olympics and other competitive bouts. The Romans also had a large spectator gathering in terms of gladiator fights and the various events that came with that, chariot races, and so forth. As far as looking at different perspectives as where sports is on screen, as they made the transition from being in person, which are really social gatherings, to a mediated entertainment area, we can see that the appeal of sports has not died. Let's just put it that way. Although there are still opportunities to see sports in arenas, primarily it is watched on screen, and it is highly available, highly marketable, and people around the world spend a lot of their time consuming such media. Here are some assorted facts that I've pulled. There are 70% of Americans as of 2014, that's approximately 168 million people, said that they watch sports in some capacity. Of these people, the average amount of time spent watching sports per week or sports-related content was 7.7 hours. So think about that as about 1/3 of one day per week spent watching sports on average. And note that this is 2014. Sports content is generally shared by 19% of people on social media, and 35% of people consume some sort of sports content from a social network. Given that this is 2014 data, that's very likely to have raised since then. And then colloquially, I just looked up ESPN's catalog of what was available on June 20th, 2018, and there were 17 different sports available to watch in that day. These sports were football, which was replays in Canadian League, basketball, baseball, softball, soccer, tennis, rugby, volleyball, track and field, golf, action or extreme sports, so things like motocross or skateboarding, auto racing, boxing, gymnastics, esports, so that's competitive video gaming, fishing, and lacrosse. And that's just in one day of content during one of the most content dead times of year, and not counting talk content on ESPN. And then according to howmuch.net in 2016, which compiled essentially reports from all the different sports leagues and just gave it put it in one infographic, but these are official numbers released by the league or financial watchdogs that monitor what is being made by different organizations. There were 11 sports leagues around the world that made in over $1 billion in revenue in 2016. The leader was the NFL with a whopping $13 billion. Major League Baseball comes in second with $9.5 billion. And this is global revenue. So we see the English Premier League and soccer generating $5.3 billion in revenue, and then the NBA and NHL with 3.7. It should be noteworthy that other teams on this list included the Bundesliga and France's Serie A and La Liga in Spain, which kind of hints at the global appeal of sports. It should also be noted that one of the reasons that it is very likely that that Major League Baseball has made so much money is because of its reputation, primarily in Spanish-speaking countries in Central America. So why do we like sports on screen? That's some numbers that illustrate that we spend a ton of time on it. Theoretically, there might be functional reasons that we watch sports, one of which should be familiar to you from watching horror and suspense, or our horror and suspense readings, which is emotional catharsis, which is the feeling that you get some sort of emotional release. Here, rather than fright or fear, the emotion that you are able to experience catharsis by having things that you would normally pent up be able to be expressed during the sports in an acceptable environment would be things like aggression, like anger, like euphoria, things that maybe in society are less acceptable or less beneficial to express in our day-to-day lives. So think about if your team loses. I know that I have done this as an avid sports fan, and I should own up to that. I have physically aggressed against inanimate objects before because my sports team has lost, and also danced like a crazy person when they have won. I'm guessing that if I went around and reacted like this on a day-to-day basis, it might not be so beneficial to me, my relationships, or society as a whole. But in the avenue of sports, just as perhaps it might have been thousands of years ago when there was more violence in the realm of sports, these are acceptable venues that we can share large emotions, and thus, rather than keeping these emotions pent up, we're able to express them somewhere. Speaking of violence, this might also be an acceptable expression of violence or aggression. Think about almost every sport has the ability to have some sort of contact. There's also a natural sense of competition in all of these sports, and generally we cheer for these sort of things. So tackles in football or soccer or hockey, a check is something that is exciting. These are the blood sport that the Romans were practicing, but at the same time, it's kind of noted that there's some sort of aggressive nature. There's something inherently aggressive about human nature that, again, is not necessarily societally acceptable, but sports might be an avenue that we can express it both by playing, watching, cheering for it, and so on. Finally, this is just exciting. Sports can be naturally fun to watch. They are entertaining, and the structure of them, as we'll discuss in a little bit, tends to favor excitement and arousal and the ability to get amped up. So especially for bored people, sports might be a way to insert a little bit of arousal and excitement into their lives, which would be functional for a user. Further expanding upon the nature of sports entertainment today as opposed to maybe the past, or how it was as it transitioned from primarily a spectator sport to one that is spectated in a mediated environment. It is pervasive, which means that it is fragmented, yet there is a committed audience. If you look at sports viewership numbers as they have evolved over the years, there hasn't been much change in terms of the proportion of viewers to the population. However, it continues to be more and more fragmented. Of the exemplars that illustrate the fragmented nature of sports audiences can be found by looking at Major League Baseball and soccer viewership, where you really won't see much changes, especially in regional markets, for viewership of sports where, say for instance, the Tampa Bay Rays in the Tampa area, their Fox affiliate might have consistent numbers of viewers that tune in to watch the Rays all the time, even though the national numbers for watching the Rays and pursuing that would be low. It might also be the same for people who are committed in the United States to watching soccer overseas. Even though the overall viewership numbers might be relatively low among the audiences that are committed to watching the sport and their teams, they're going to be likely to wake up in the morning and view regardless. So although the numbers are not going to fluctuate and that they are not necessarily across the board, not everybody watches every sport and every team, when you do choose to watch a sport, you tend to be committed to the rules for your viewership. It's also commercialized. As you saw, these are money-making industries that sell advertising space. have humongous contracts in almost all sports, advertising deals for players, to the point that I know that NBA teams and baseball teams are considering adopting European models and selling multiple endorsements on their jerseys. We're getting to the era where there are baseball players that might be earning upwards of $350 million in a contract spread out over 8 to 11 years, and so on. This is a money-making industry. And then finally, in terms of the nature of actual broadcast television, this might be the last reason to keep live broadcast TV. Sports might be the greatest reality show. It's something that ESPN specifically refers to in terms of the NFL draft for football, that because of the drama and the uncertainty, sports are really seen as the last functional reason to keep cable, as streaming like Netflix and other ways to watch on your own time become more popular and more available and more acceptable in terms of using media as social interaction, as something to talk about with your friends. Sports, on the other hand, happens at set times, and thus generally sports users have to buy cable in order to watch them at that short times, be involved, watch their favorite teams, etc. In terms of disposition theory, which was, again, we're going to revisit this because it is a very popular theory by Zillman and one that explains a lot. It does apply to sports. So first, how do we form dispositions towards our sports teams and our favorite players? Zillman describes that usually these are our favorite teams, and our favorite teams are in-group members. This might be somebody from the same region or city, people that look like us or the same nationality, might be the same gender, size, hair color, etc. Throughout these examples, I'll be giving you kind of phrasing them within one of my favorite teams, which is the Chicago Cubs. Why are they in-group members to me? Well, I was born on the north side of Chicago to two North Siders and then moved to a nearby area in Michigan City where essentially the nearest team is either the Chicago Cubs or the Chicago White Sox. So they were naturally close, and most of my family members cheered for the Cubs. So essentially the Cubs were a part of my family structure, a part of how I identified my region, and just naturally easier to follow. Beyond disposition formation at the team level, we can also find favorite players. Often these are on our favorite team, but they can be found on different teams that maybe you just admire a player for different reasons. Similarly to the way that you would form dispositions for your team, so by identifying with them or admiring them in some way. Usually they can be an exemplar of an in-group member, so somebody that you see as yourself to the nth degree, or as the perfect version of whatever it is that you're identifying your in-group members with. So currently for the Chicago Cubs, my favorite player is Anthony Rizzo. He's an Italian-born, as I am, player who has been around. I have a tendency as I'm a grandson of a bricklayer. I'm the son of a father who did not stay in the profession that he went to school with, and a mother who started a building from scratch. Hard work was very valued to me in my family, and Anthony Rizzo is somebody that has kind of gone through the Cubs as they've gone from bad to good. I find that I identify with that as well. Same nationality, favorite team, etc. But you might find other reasons. Maybe somebody of the same gender as you. If you're a woman viewer, you might be more likely to have a favorite player that even might not be in your favorite league. So even though you watch the NBA, you might identify and say that your favorite player is somebody in the WNBA. Just because you see them as more like yourself. You can also find silly reasons to identify with a favorite player. They might play the same position as you played when you were in school, or maybe even just kind of you like their look, or you perceive yourself as having a similar mindset to them. Nothing exemplifies this more than U.S. soccer star Megan Rapinoe. I've always kind of liked the fact that she changes her hair, which I like. I tend to do as well. In terms of how these dispositions translate into enjoyment of sports, Generally, as you would expect, fans enjoy when their favorite team wins, especially when their favorite player is the cause. And if their rival team or whoever they are competing against fails and their favorite player is the cause fails, that might also result in enjoyment. So say, for instance, the Cubs are playing their rivals, the Cardinals, in a game in the playoffs. My favorite scenarios would be my favorite outcome in this scenario would be if the Cubs won and Anthony Rizzo hit a game-winning home run. He's my favorite player who led my favorite team to success. By contrast, enjoyment would decrease or be absent when your favorite team or your favorite player fails or loses, or the competition or rival succeeds and a rival player is the cause. So in my scenario, Cubs are playing the Cardinals. I would be very sad if the Cubs lost and a notorious Cardinals player named Yadier Molina was the cause. I would be very sad in that instance. In terms of drama and suspense, these also contribute heavily in terms of how sports as a narrative event. So think about a game as a narrative that has a beginning, middle, and end. They are both dramatic and suspenseful. These are real-life battles between two players, two teams, that happen at the micro level. So think about at-bats in baseball or plays in football, but also on the grand level of a game or a season. There's always hype before games and matches, either between fans or even added by the media. We'll talk about commentary effects that generally commentary added, and when sports announcers talk about a game, they tend to emphasize differences between two teams and make it seem like the contest itself is more important than it is. We'll have an example of that in just a second. Sports are also extremely suspenseful. As I mentioned earlier, they are constantly a novel experience. You never know what the outcome is going to be. And that means that as uncertainty of this outcome and the fact that it's not pre-recorded, there's no ending, it's happening in real time. As we come to the near an end and it's still a close game, this can increase the amount of suspense in the game. Will you or won't you win or lose? And this can create this sort of exciting, dysphoric state, especially when it's a close game and you have strong dispositions for one team or the other. Think about the end of a really tight Michigan versus Michigan State game where the teams are tied and it's the fourth quarter. I'm guessing that you are probably, your heart beating, if you care about the game, your heart is beating pretty rapidly, and you're kind of teetering on this state of tense, uncertain of the ending, and really, really fearing that Michigan State will lose, if it's most of you watching out there, or that Michigan will win, but also very excited that the opposite could happen and Michigan State could come through. So regardless, generally we think of why might this be, in terms of framing this in terms of suspense, referring back to excitation transfer, which we talked about in an earlier chapter. Zillman would say that a win, so seeing the people that you like succeed, might increase enjoyment because of an arousal jag. You go from tense to a sense of euphoria that returns you to a homeostatic, a state of homeostasis, which is generally desirable for viewers. So essentially, because you're going from this high arousal, kind of negative state, to one of euphoria and happiness and calmness, this might be an appeal of sports overall. So I actually have a couple of videos, and they're not going to work, unfortunately, here, but they're pulled from a very exciting game. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But they are both pulled from a game between Alabama and Auburn in 2013. The first one will have no sound, and the second one will. And I'd just like you to pay attention to both of them and think about maybe some of the commentator effects, about hyping up the game, emphasizing differences, even talking about things in the moment as being more exciting than they are, more violent than they are, more suspenseful than they are, in order to amplify some of those dramatic and suspenseful effects of sports. So All right, so you watch that. Think about it. Think about what you just kind of watched, how you felt, and then we'll watch highlights from the exact same game, except this time with sound.
There is a huge gathering of fans outside Jordan-Hare Stadium this afternoon, while the Tigers make their traditional Tiger Walk to come inside Jordan-Hare. A small group of vocal Alabama fans here to cheer on the undefeated Crimson Tide and their head coach, Nick Saban. Inside Jordan-Hare, all the pageantry that makes life in the SEC so special, but this one this afternoon especially so. We welcome you to the Home Depot SEC on CBS. It's the 78th Iron Bowl featuring Alabama, number 1, and Auburn, number 4. Play action, McCarron, how about this decision? Going deep, Amari Cooper is there, has it, loose, down the right side, there are no flags, and that is a 99-yard touchdown, McCarron, Cooper, Alabama leads. Cole Mazza snaps it, A.J. McCarron holds it, Cade Foster kicks it, and it's going to be wide left. It's blocked. It's blocked. DeReese Robinson blocked it. Ryan Smith picks it up, and the nightmare continues for Cade Foster at the 40. Marshall keeps it, tries to get around the edge, tips it out. It's caught by Sammy Coates, strolls in, touchdown, Auburn.
Remember, a blocked kick can go the other way, too. He's got to be careful and get it up.
On the way. No, returned by Chris Davis. Davis goes left. Davis gets a block. Davis has another block. Chris Davis. No flags. Touchdown, Auburn. The final score, 34-28. Tigers win.
So think about that. You just saw the exact same clip twice, and I'm guessing that the first one with the hype up and then the actual added commentary might have added to the suspense. They previewed plays. They talked about the drama of 99-yard things. This might just be one reason that we watch sports on TV is for those broadcast effects. So wrapping up, here's some discussion. Leading into uses and gratification, there seems to be some sort of social function of sports. We love talking about it. It's a sense of identity and really binds us together. Think about the amount of green that you see on campus during football season. So that might be something to think about as you look at your discussion. Another thing is a different, I just wanted to bring up that Burging and Corfing are other sports-related theories. Burging refers to basking in reflective glory, so it's essentially even though fans have no effect over an outcome, they have a tendency that when they succeed to identify with their favorite teams and say we won, as if they are a part of the success in order to increase their enjoyment. By contrast, Corfing, which is cutting off reflective failure, kind of refers to the fact that when your favorite team lose, you might say, oh, they're bums, they lost. Again, I'd just kind of like you to think about these last two questions as well as you get ready to post your discussion for the week. Are sports the last bastion for live television? Does that mean that is it the last reason to keep your live television broadcast? Or is there some other reason? Or can sports be something that will eventually move to streaming functions? Or does it have to be watched live? And then what is a sport? Is NASCAR a sport? Is auto racing? Is golf? These are things that we tend to think of having less physical engagement involved, but are generally counted as sports. And then one that is more recent is esports, which is competitive video gaming and other electronic contests. Do these count as sports? There's certainly competition in all of them. However, do they qualify as sports based on your view?